to initiate the session and move forward. Thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you. Thank you and warm welcome to the first paper presentation session on trade. I'm laudable. I'm not coming to the video. I'm just, switching off my video. I think I have to give few words, introduce the chair and speakers. So this is the first session, paper presentation session, and just to tell you, Sanim and the partner organizations, this Bay of Bengal Economic Dialogue, they put a call for papers almost a month back, and we received good interest and many papers, in fact, and out of which we had a quick review done, and we picked up almost about 21 papers, and this is a good interest towards the subject. And the first paper presentation session is on trade. To moderate the session, it will be done, the chair will be Professor S.K. Mahanti, who is a senior professor in my organization at RIS. And there are 3 papers, first by Dr. Mia Mikic. The region knows her very well. She doesn't need any special introduction. And she will be presenting a paper assessing participation of BIMSTEC countries in global and regional value chains, very much part of the discussion that we had just before this session. Second paper by Samina Sarmin. She is a Joint Director, Financial Stability Department, Bangladesh Bank, along with co-authors Dr. Kaji Arif Jaman. It's on the role of inter-regional trade openness on fostering SDGs in BIMSTEC countries in post-COVID period. Very topical topic, and very, I am sure that this will be another important presentation. Third one, which is the integration of SMEs in BIMSTEC regional value chain and for sustainable post-COVID recovery, by Mr. Nishant Khanal. He is a master's student at Likyuan Public Policy University of Singapore, written with co-author from Tribhuvan University, Mr. Padam Raj Kandru. Then we have very well-known discussant, again, the region knows him very well, Dr. Rajak, our good friend from PRI, is a research director. So the time will be 6:30 to 7, and the Dhaka time. Presenters will get 10 minutes maximum. PowerPoints very limited, 4 to 5 slides, and then the discussant, Dr. Rajak, he will comment on the papers. He will get 10 minutes equally, and then the rest, if we save time, say 15 to 20 minutes, chair will decide. We will have a second round and the discussions. So with this opening remarks, this is the first paper presentation sessions in the Bay of Bengal Economic Dialogue. May I call upon Professor S.K. Mahanti, a senior professor from RIS, who is a known hand on the subject. He is a trade economist. He's very, very important economist. The region knows him, Professor Mahanti. So over to you, Professor, and please feel free to share the sessions. Thank you. Professor Mahanti.
I am audible now?
Yeah, you are audible.
Thank you, Professor De, for your kind words. Good afternoon to everybody. I got a very eminent panel, and most of them are known. I have my personal interaction with them for the last several decades. Thank you, Dr. Miyamichi. Now, the region is really a very thriving region, very dynamic region. And really, the progress in the region has gone down significantly in the post-COVID period. even in 2019, it was somewhat less in terms of its dynamism. But between 2003 to 2018, the region was very dynamic. Its share in the world GDP increased from 2.5% in 2003 to 4.4% in 2018. That we can see in different areas in trade. Trade expanded very rapidly, and international trade also quite substantial if we compare it with South Asia, SAARC. Now, if we see the international trade in GVC, global value chain, particularly parts and components, it is a bit low, maybe around 4.2% in 2018, as compared to intra-regional trade in intermediates, which was around 6.3 against the overall international trade of 5.9% in the same year. So if you take the intermediate sector as a whole, particularly the international trade in intermediate, I think GBC is relatively low. It is nearly 10%. But if we look at the overall intermediate, it is more than 50%. So that is the way we can see within GBC international trade, certain sectors are dominating. Maybe manufacturing, which is covering 65% of international trade of the region, and automobiles around to 23%. So this is the regional setting. Sometime back in RIS, we did a study to examine the extent of parts and components and the GVC trade in the different segments. And it is clearly emerging from the study conducted within South Asia that there are several regional hubs which can really be promoted in different sectors, both in agriculture and in manufacturing. So one thing is very certain, that the region is thriving very rapidly. Particularly in the post-pandemic period, the growth rate slowed down, and there is ample of scope for GBC to grow. And I have got three panelists, three papers to be presented, and very seminal papers, though very short, but very seminal papers, covered various dimensions from GBC to trade linkages to different SDGs, so MSME. So various issues are discussed in those papers, and also various models used in all of them. So I think I would like to invite now Dr. Miyamichi for her presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Professor Mahante and Prabir, for your kind introduction, and of course to Sanem and other co-organizers for allowing me and my co-author to present this paper. So let me, because we only have 10 minutes, let me go straight into it, just to organize my screen so that I can show you the presentation. I hope it's visible to all. As I said, this is the Luna Gaelai, and she is not joining us at this time because she is in Victoria University of New Zealand, so it's way behind her bedtime to be up. The paper that we will be distributing soon is much broader and goes into more analysis than this short PowerPoint presentation. But the gist of it is what I'm going to be talking about now. So we just want to put it in a context as it was from this very morning, and actually yesterday's opening as well, in a context of a broader global integration and globalization. And as that one is also being changed through the different sort of forces influencing the evolution of globalization, not only most recently COVID and perhaps the one coming climate change, but also through different other shocks that we knew, that we met, trade tensions, and then before that the crisis in terms of demand through the global financial crisis, etc. We, on top of that, the changes that influence the pattern of globalization come from the technology and innovation side. We are very much aware of labor-saving technologies that enable various advanced countries to actually replace a significant part of production that used to be dependent on using unskilled, cheap labor in developing countries. And so that definitely also influence the way of how developing countries, and in particular the graduating least developed countries, will be able to use integration into global economy in terms of their future prosperity building and path towards sustainable development. As we know, the biggest part of the modern merchandise trade is really, and services trade, I should say, is based on integrated economies through the value chains. And what this paper wants to just provide is some sort of evidence or measuring of the integration for through the value chains for the BIMSTEC countries, in order to provide a sort of a more solid footing in building the policies for the next stage of integration. So what I'm going to do is just very briefly talk about the importance for being integrated. I don't, we are all among the scholars of international economics, so I don't need to really dwell on that one a lot. But let me just repeat that the way that empirical and theoretical literature point towards is that being integrated in the global economy, particularly through the global value chains, may speed up and make industrialization process of the current developing countries smoother and easier and faster. And the question then remains in the 21st century, why the industrialization is still important? Well, because it does carry a sort of growth of productivity that is important, but also it definitely uses the factors of production in a different way than the services sector do, and may actually lead towards more efficient use of those resources. But we cannot put all the, all the hopes or all the sort of efforts in developing through the globalization, because, as I said, there are caveats, and not only that we have faced the slowing of the growth of the global value chain share in global trade, but there will be changing in terms of not only growth so far as we saw so far, but also in terms of patterns. And these patterns will definitely be impacted by also the more recent sort of calls for reshape of the value chains through COVID, that came through COVID supply chain disruptions and further geopolitical pressures. So in terms of the BIMSTEC countries, what we really need to discover is, and we understand from anecdotal evidence and just looking around, that integration of BIMSTEC countries varies from country to country into global and regional economy. We can say that it's not fully realized, and then we want to see how much in terms of the actual more specific measures there is of this integration through the global value chains, and then discuss what do we do next. So in terms of the, I don't, intend to define global value chains looking at the time as well. But obviously there are different methodologies and different approaches of how you can measure it. And the well-known approach in measuring the share of or the rate of participation is through Wang et al. Method that looks at the uses input-output methods and measures the share in terms of the GDP content that is allocated to the different aspects of these linkages through the value chains. So there are three basic linkages that we measure here, and we look in a compound way in the end. One is, of course, looking at backward and forward linkages. Another one is in terms of simple and complex value chains. And then the most important probably is dependence on intra-regional and extra-regional linkages in the global value chain integration. So the forward and backward linkages, I think, are very easy to understand, because one just needs to understand that forward linkage is exporting to export, or exporting to supply the inputs to another group of producers across the border that will then use it in their production.
Dear presenter, you have 2 minutes left.
Okay, thank you. And then the backward one is really the conventional import content of export. On top of that, you can also classify these linkages in terms of simple and complex. Simple crosses the border only once, complex more than two or more times. And then what is more important is really to understand how much of these is done within the region and how much is done outside the world from the region that we define. So what we use is the ADB database and these methodologies that I have explained to really understand how much of the BIMSTEC individual economies are integrated through these forward and backward linkages in the simple and the complex way. And so these measurements are given in the tables that I cannot in detail explain. But obviously they will vary from one year to the next, depending on the structure of that year trade and production. When it comes to the integration in terms of the regional and outside of the region linkages, this is where we can understand how low the integration within the region is. I'm circling here the linkage of Bangladesh in particular with respect to the importation from the region, being BIMSTEC, in comparison or in ratio to the outside of the BIMSTEC region. And so you can see that here the foreign value added is very low in terms of the Bangladeshi final demand for the value chains, and also that value from the region is quite minimal compared with, for example, Nepal here or Thailand here. We see how little or how less Bangladesh is integrated in the region. As a comparison, we have produced the data for East and Southeast Asian countries. Let me just summarize very quickly.
Your time is up.
Yes, I'm just gonna, if you allow me 30 seconds, to underline the following points. The measurement indicates towards a very low integration of the BIMSTEC economies in particular the least developed economies in that context. And it does not indicate any sort of a great integration within the BIMSTEC economies within themselves. They depend more on the outside of the BIMSTEC region in terms of both forward and backward linkages. What does it mean for the future development of these countries? Well, it means that they need to understand how, if they want to utilize possible reshaping of the value chains that may happen, meaning movement of the some of the stages of the production from China or from Southeast Asia towards South Asia and the BIMSTEC region, they need to understand which particular stage of production they can use. And for that, we need to go deeper, as it's shown in the paper, in the sectoral analysis, and to see where these linkages between the BIMSTEC economies can be actually facilitated and enabled. Depends on the drivers, institutional factors, already existing frameworks like the free trade agreements that allow reduction of the cost of trade and transaction costs, and the easier crossing of these borders, because that is the key in terms of allowing establishment and growth of the value chains within the sub-region. A big competitor in that sense is RCEP, which has done an excellent effort in terms of producing single trade rules for the 15 economies with the very simple rules of origin that would allow accumulation, and that would be very difficult to beat. So the question is then whether BIMSTEC itself has a future in the context of being competitor for attraction of the value chains or not. Let me stop there, and I will be very happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Dr. Memichi. Your paper clearly indicating that the role of value chain in terms of industrializing the regional economies, and also the level of participation of regional economies in BIMSTEC is pretty low. So more active policies are to be pursued to promote this sector. Now, I would like to invite Dr. Samirim. Please present. Floor is yours. Please present your PPT.
Okay. Honorable Chair of this session, Professor S.K. Mohanty, fellow presenter, discussant, and distinguished participants of this World Conference. Good evening.
Ms. Sharmin, can you please be a bit louder, because we can't hear you. At the same time, your screen is not shared. Thank you.
Is it okay?
So we will actually run the screen on your behalf, and would you please be a bit louder?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, I think.
Yes, we can.
And screen is shared.
Yes, please go ahead.
Okay. Honorable Chair of this session is Professor S.K. Mohanty, fellow presenter, discussant, and distinguished participants of this World Conference. Good evening. I am Shamima Sharmin, feeling privileged to present our paper titled Role of Intra-Regional Trade Openness on Fostering SDGs in BIMSTEC countries at post-COVID period. Dr. Kazi Arifuzzaman is the other contributor of this paper. COVID-19 pandemic, as we all know, has been costing millions of lives while remarkably also slowing down the global economy, leaving no one behind. IMF estimated that this pandemic would result in a global GDP contraction of 4.4% in 2020. It also presumes that the pandemic will reverse the progress of global poverty reduction, which was made since the 1990s. Such disruption has widespread consequences in countries' development path. Poverty and inequalities shoot up as many people lost their jobs. Socio-economic balance has been interrupted. Governments also had to forego the expected level of revenues on one hand, while they had to allocate additional expenditures in health and social safety nets. One major concern is such an additional fiscal burden has slowed down the implementation of the much promising sustainable development goals that the countries pledged to attain by 2030. As we know, inclusiveness is at the heart of SDG implementation. It acknowledges the need for concerted efforts not only within the country, but also among the countries. It is even more relevant in this present pandemic situation. Cross-border trade in this connection could play a critical role in fostering the attainments of the SDGs. It is because the trade policies are assumed to have substantial impacts on the welfare of households, farms, and the economy as a whole. Hence, trade can be a good solution to revitalize the SDGs at this COVID recovery period. In our paper, we try to answer two sequential questions. First of all, how trade can influence SDGs, and how far trade liberalization would help a regional bloc like BIMSTEC countries to realize the respective SDGs. Here, we use the empirical evidence which will be followed by some theoretical framework in the original paper. Secondly, once if the trade openness seems to have a positive impact on attaining SDG targets, the next question that needs to answer is that how the countries can further open their trades, especially trade, intra-regional trade, more efficiently. For empirical analysis, all 7 member countries of BIMSTEC are considered here. Two objectives used two different methodologies here. To relate the role of trade openness on SDGs, historical data are plotted to understand the traits of the relationships. Secondly, on the next, to determine the existing intra-BIMSTEC trade efficiency, stochastic frontier gravity model has been adopted with using bilateral trade approach. Export from country I to country J at time T has been the independent variable which the model wants to maximize. 6 explanatory variables are used: GDP of export and import countries, distance between them, weighted applied tariff rate, cross exchange rate ratio, and regional trade agreement as the dummy variable. Here, U refers to the single-sided error term for the combined effects of the border constraints on which full information is not available. Hence, this represents the inefficiency term into the model. B is normally distributed statistical error term, independent from U. The model uses gamma for parameterization whose value lies between 0 and 1. If gamma equals to 0, then U term has no implication into the model. And conversely, a higher, that means closer to 1 value of gamma, would refer to the validity of using the stochastic frontier gravity model framework. And last of all, export efficiency is measured from the equation shown, and value lies between 0 and 1. Next, now the results. trade openness has been plotted against key SDG indicators as shown in different charts here. We can see a positive relationship of the BIMSTEC countries' trade openness with per capita income as well as per capita household consumption. It indicates that trade openness may have positive influence of SDG 1, that is poverty elevation. A strong positive relationship exists between agricultural trade openness and food security in these countries. The impact of, in the next slide, in next chart, the impact of trade liberalization on employment generation seems most promising. We can see the positive trends here. And this slide shows the role of trade openness in the BIMSTEC countries. Findings imply that trade openness may reduce income inequality in all countries except India and Sri Lanka. Trade liberalization seems to have a very little positive impact on gender equality in this region. In this slide, we try to calculate the untapped potentiality, potentiality of trade openness. We can see inter-regional trade among BIMSTEC amounts around 45.9 billion US dollar in 2019. India, Bangladesh, and Thailand having the major shares in it. Stochastic frontier gravity model reveals that India has the highest export efficiency of 93.7% in intra-BIMSTEC trade, followed by Bangladesh with 88%.
Dear presenter, you have 2 minutes left.
Contrarily, Sri Lanka and Thailand have the least intra-BIMSTEC export efficiencies of 51.2% and 66.9% respectively. In aggregate, the whole region has a weighted average trade efficiency of 81.4%, revealing that countries can increase the untapped potential of intra-regional trade by 18.6%, equivalent to 8.54 billion. This shows coefficients of estimates of export determinants. We can see that GDP of the exporting and importing countries have mostly influenced the export growth in a positive way. Distance and tariff, as expected, adversely affect the trade among BIMSTEC countries. Other than Thailand, the cross-exchange rate ratio impact remained negative and small. Regional trade agreements seems to have profound positive impacts on intra-BIMSTEC countries. High level of gamma refers that models are well suited for stochastic frontier analysis. Here is the summary. We considered that inter-regional trade could be a key driving factor for fostering the implementation of SDGs at post-COVID era, which is the key challenge for BIMSTEC countries. Secondly, trade openness, as per empirical evidences, may promote poverty elevation, zero hunger, and employment generation. Trade openness may reduce income inequality in all countries but India and Sri Lanka. India is found to have the highest export efficiency, followed by Bangladesh. In countries can increase the untapped potential of inter-regional trade by 18.6%, equivalent to 8.55 billion US dollar per annum through removing the existing trade barriers. And this study has some important policy implications for BIMSTEC region. First of all, estimating the determinants of export efficiencies would help the countries to take necessary measures to improve the relevant trade facilitation. Secondly, regional institutional framework can be established to make the necessary reforms. Such measures would comprise plausible trade creation, technology transfer, and capacity building of the countries. Higher efficiency in exports, in turn, ensures the higher welfare for the customers as well as the producer in this region. So it would be also widen up the scope of intensifying the sustainable production and uses of goods and services for the countries, which is so crucial in achieving SDGs targets within the region. So finally, BIMSTEC countries can emphasize on intra-regional investment, cross-border connectivity, and trade facilitation. That's all of my presentation.
Thank you, Dr. Shamima. Very nice presentation. Your paper focused on the linkages between trade liberalization and its impact on SDGs. Your study has very clearly examined the existing competitiveness or efficiency in exports in individual countries of the BIMSTEC region. And The region has also large trade potential to the extent of $6.9 billion. And your conclusion is again that if really can thrive in the area of interregional trade, that would really address many of the SDG issues. So thank you very much for your paper. Now I would like to invite Mr. Nishant Khanal. Floor is yours, please.
Thank you, Honorable Chair. Am I audible?
Yes, yes.
I hope my screen has been shared properly there.
Yes, yes, perfectly all right.
Okay. Thank you so much, Chair, Honorable Chair, and all the participants of this August gathering. We are very thankful to Sanim for providing us this opportunity on presenting our paper, the working paper that we've been working on since past couple of months, that we're trying to see the impact of COVID on SMEs. As we don't have much of a time, I'll just quickly run through the presentation, and I will just try to sum it up what we've come across up to now on the paper. As our paper is, we just try to look after SMEs because for the discussions we had yesterday and today as well on the sessions, that SMEs play a crucial role in the trade in BIMSTEC, and BIMSTEC, the backbone for BIMSTEC has been SMEs always, as there's a lot of the SMEs contribute 75% of the total enterprise in the Bay of Bengal region. Also, they formally and informally employ over 90% of the contribution to the employment rate as well. As we know, the SMEs are the formal like driving force behind the Bay of Bengal region. I'm here like slightly presenting what impacts the SME have on the particular countries of the BIMSTEC region. We can see that the country Bangladesh have 90% of the industrial enterprise in Bangladesh are SMEs, and then 4 out of 5 industrial workers from Bangladesh are employed in SME sector. The SMEs contribute 1/3 of the GDP as well. In Bhutan, 90% of the private sector in Bhutan's SMEs. So we can see how the SMEs have impacted in the region as well. In India, the SMEs have 30.5% of service sector contribute and 37.54% of GDP contribution as well. When it comes to Nepal, Myanmar, Sri Lanka, and Thailand as well, all of these countries have SMEs have a very crucial role on all of these countries' economy. However, they've not been much more addressed in the policy arena, and the reason behind us to like go through and study the impact on SMEs that we've not seen much of a policy intervention on SMEs for the post-COVID. We're trying to see the overview or overall impact of how is the intra-regional trade in BIMSTEC and what are the impacts of SMEs and COVID as well. So we can see that the intra-regional trade just make approximately 7% of the total world trade of the BIMSTEC region. However, the regions not trading, as we also saw from the previous presentations as well. And the members constitute 3.8% of the world trade only, which we can see a lot of intra-regional trade of possibilities in BIMSTEC as well. Another interesting finding that we found was that tariffs are no longer the major barrier to the intra-regional trade in BIMSTEC. However, the non-tariff measures are still the major problem behind the region not trading within itself. On the other side, while we were just looking for the impact of COVID into SMEs, we've seen supply and demand side disruption. When it comes to supply side, there were like some key factors that we saw was the SMEs saw a reduction in labor and the labor force not being available. Most of the labor force being female and staying at home taking care of children because of the schools closure and all. On the other side, they also have the liquidity crunch as well. On the demand side, there was the sudden loss of demand from the market, as well as the consumers demand reduction in consumer demand. Also forced SMEs to not produce and trade itself. So that's another uh, disruption that the SMEs forced, as we've already known about this as well. On the other hand, the most impacted business, I think all of the SMEs were impacted, but we saw a very drastic downfall on the textile export from Sri Lanka and Bangladesh, and tourism in all the major countries, as Bay of Bengal relies a lot on tourism, and this most of the countries, the SMEs also rely on tourism. Tourism has been impacted and badly hard hit as well. On the other side, Nepal's been exporting a lot of agriculture products and handicraft product along with India. This has also been impacted after the COVID. That's what we have come across through up to now. So our research questions were very broad. We just, as a student, we're just trying to learn this new model that I'll be presenting in a while. So we thought of just going through and checking what could be the pushable SME value chain that we can do, and how, what are the gravity model implication on the trade after this. So we just saw like this our broad research questions here. So we used an pseudo Poisson maximum likelihood PPML gravity model. So the idea of this was we wanted to have an extended gravity model to trade, as as usually the literatures in gravity models deal with a large number of macro variables, export, import, and distance. We saw a recent trend that there's a lot of like sector-wise disaggregated data, micro data as well. So we tried to use that on this model, and we used a four SME product. Those products were the highest exported product for past 5 years from Nepal. We used a honey, woolen carpet, and leather products, and from Nepal. Our data were taken from the World Bank, Trade and Export Promotion Center in Nepal, the UN, and the Transparency International. In this model, we estimated that Nepal's export, our paper was broadly guided by the Santos and Silva paper 2006 paper, that they use this PPML model, because this model is a solution to the problem of heteroscedasticity and the zero trade flow between the countries. Because we wanted to not have a selection bias here, so we tried to use this model. So when it comes to the findings, we took the four export, as I already mentioned, the four export from Nepal, and variables we tried to see corruption as a governance factor, and then inflation as well. We use the BIMSTEC dummy variable. So when we saw that corruption perception
Dear presenter, you have 2 minutes left.
Thank you. The corruption perception index of the exporter country we found has a significant impact on trade. So we thought that if the country has a better governance, then there's a bilateral trade tend to increase as well. The inflation of the exporter country exhibit negative impact on the bilateral trade, which is significant at this 0% level, 1% level. So higher inflation tend to have a negative impact on the export as well. GDP of the exporter country showed an inverse relation with the bilateral trade, so which could be due to rise in gross domestic product, which may be by the increase in the domestic population as well. So we tried this as well. We used the SAFTA. We also experimented the SAFTA BIMSTEC dummies here. So that shows that if any particular country is a member of BIMSTEC and SAFTA, then the bilateral trade is a possibility. There's an increasing possibility of having more bilateral and intra-regional trade as well. So I tried this for the first time actually. And on the other hand, we also saw that we used these four products, but the four products were more or less similar. The lot of products that BIMSTEC countries are trading or the countries are exporting are SME based. That's why we can always, we tried the same data from other countries as well, other top export variables from other countries. So we're yet to fit in all the major export from other countries. So on the based on the whatever work we've done, so we found that BIMSTEC countries, there's no tariff cost at the moment, but the non-tariff measures should be there, should be the focus on the trade policy that they should be reducing as well. For the SMEs to flourish, there's a lot of informal sector going on. So informal sectors should be tried to be integrated in the formal sector. And as we talked in the earlier sessions as well, I think we should reduce the barriers to entry to the market for the informal SMEs, so that there is a larger possibility of them joining the formal sector. That would also give us more of data and insight. So BIMSTEC nations should focus more on inter-regional trade and value chain for the V-shaped recovery, because we've seen the likelihood, the trade likelihood has been increasing as well. On the other hand, as we've already, when we talk about BIMSTEC, we tend to neglect SAFTA. So as we use the BIMSTEC and SAFTA dummies, we see a positive relation there. So if BIMSTEC and SAFTA go along with, if with the BIMSTEC and SAFTA sit together and they find a middle ground to promote SMEs, I think that could be another possible another possible injection for the growth in the region as well. On the other hand, to harmonize this trade, the trade with comparative advantage, which we've not seen lately, I think should be maximized, and also to maximize the gain, it should be there as well. So I've just tried to wrap up a presentation here. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Nishan. A very good presentation. I think not only in BIMSTEC region, the entire world is now grappling with getting information about MSME. Everywhere, discussions are related to SMEs, how we can improve, and what is the role of MSME in the post-pandemic period is the core issue. Identification of industries, identification of clusters, identification of firms, and identification of trade stemming from SME is a major task. So if we have done very nicely, that could be a kind of eye-opener for many researchers. I think in many countries, people can take note of your methodologies, but I'm sure that you must have done justice to your paper. But definitely this paper is quite interesting and quite substantial. You have given justice to this paper by using gravity model with the Poisson model. I think PPML, which is quite fascinating. With these words, I would like now to open the floor for discussion. And before that, I would like to invite Dr. Rajak, who is known to all of us, his views on these papers. Dr. Rajak.
Thank you, Chair. Professor Mohanty, good to see you after a long time. And I'm most grateful to Dr. Salim Rahan and Stanel for inviting me to this conference, and let me discuss these three excellent papers, I must say. Now, the thing is this, all the three papers, they have done some kind of empirical work, and this is this evidence-based policy making or advice, that we always try to promote, and very good to see that, this is now being done in the context of the region, and that may have, really, quality policy inputs, going forward. The first paper on the global value chain for the BIMSTEC region, and I'm glad that the authors actually start with some of the caveats, of the global value chains. As you know, these days, GVCs, they are on the retreat. And Dr. Mia Mikic, she has rightly pointed out the issues, that are currently affecting the global value chain processes. Having said that, I think in terms of the exercise, she has mentioned, how those things were estimated, including the backward versus forward linkages and a simple and complex and those things. Now, one big problem with the GVC analysis is this, it's interpretation, okay? And sometimes, we are not in a position to interpret them in a way that would be meaningful. Just to give you an example. For example, in table 1, if you think Bangladesh forward linkage or the forward GVC, and that is saying that it has fallen between 2010 and I think 2019 from 11.3 to 8.2. Now, what does that mean? You could say that that is bad from the GVC point of view, but the policymakers would argue that is not necessarily a bad thing, because by forward value addition means Bangladesh would like to add more value to say raw leather or crushed leather rather than exporting it to Thailand, you see. So there is the dilemma whether that is necessarily bad or good thing. But I take the point. If you think about from the regional integration point of view, that could be interpreted in a different manner. Similarly, like, when the results are such that Sri Lanka's GVC, forward GVC is 20.1 against Vietnam's 4.0. Now, can you say, like, which country is doing better? Again, subject to interpretation, like, whether you want to add more value into your country or not. And this is the dilemma of the GVC, look, because this is such a production mechanism where we're slicing up the production process and trying to add small value to one particular segment. So that has been a genuine kind of, dilemma. I didn't understand from the tables presented, like, the coefficients, are they a share of exports or export value added or GDP value added? Because in my view, the backward linkage coefficient that the table show does not tally with, what we are aware of, the knowledge from Bangladesh. I found it, really, really low, that particular figure. So that's one issue. My final point is, though, on that particular paper is this: just by looking into GVC and the trade that is taking place, whether you can make any comment on how the FTA is going to promote it. You see, the trouble is, from the policy point of view, there is no barrier to export, especially in the context of Bangladesh and many other countries. The export, there are no duty attached. And also, like, when the goods are being imported as inputs that are going to export industry, I mean, there is also no tariff barriers at all. So in that context, perhaps, if you're building FTA or RTA, that shouldn't have any implications for the regional value chain. That is something we need to be mindful of. Let me now move on to the second paper. Actually, to be honest, I also like this particular methodological approach, the stochastic frontier gravity model. It can work well. But I think the biggest problem of this particular issue, I mean, it's a broad point that I'd like to make with this second paper is this: export gains, all right. But how about the welfare gains? And the issue here is because, think about the countries. Some countries have got really protected economy. Bangladesh, average tariff rates are quite high. And I think also for Sri Lanka, those average MFN tariff rates have increased over time. Now, if we are going for FTA or regional integration, as the paper suggests, in that case, there is a possibility that you might get some export gains, but that could also come at the cost of, trade diversion. So somehow we need to link the export gains and trade diversion, and from there we would have to, infer about the overall welfare gains. So that is one issue that I think we need to think about. And especially in the context of Bangladesh, we know the tariff rates are pretty high. Second point I would like to mention about the paper is this: I do not think, the simple plotting of historical data on trade and the sustainable development indicators is a good idea in showing that, how trade is impacting the SDG indicators. We need to have, good model, and then we can have some, conclusive remarks in that way. The other issue is on the table. I think, the first PowerPoint slides that we got there, it was shown as intra-regional exports. And for the Bangladesh, the figure was $7.1 billion. In the second set of slides that the author has presented, the number had changed to 9 point something. And now it is being called intra-regional trade. But to be honest, either number, does not correspond to the Bangladesh figure, that we are aware of. So I would like to know what that number is. And my final observation is this: look, I mean, in this paper, we're trying to make a very bold policy conclusion or recommendation, but we need to be mindful. In order to have that kind of, bold policy implications, we also need very robust and, big evidence that the trade is going to be that impactful. Now, the overall gains, which is the potential, the trade that is not being achieved, the author has identified or calculated to be around, I think, just about $1 billion. In the initial paper, it was 0.8 billion. So if you think about Bangladesh, I'm just referring to Bangladesh. Bangladesh has got an overall GDP of about $350 billion. So that means if you are going to liberalize, as the paper is presented here, is that if you're going for the full-fledged liberalization, even then the gains are going to be just less than 1 day's GDP for Bangladesh. Now, do you think with that kind of gain, you could convince the policymakers that you should go for dismantling all trade barriers? And itself, they themselves are policymakers, and they know how difficult it is, to convince policymakers about the trade liberalization and the political economic factors behind it. So I thought, that number was too low. I do not know why. One possibility could be, I did not say in the estimation that they have used the multilateral resistance term in the gravity model. Probably if that would be incorporated, perhaps, those gains could be quite different. So I think I would like to request the authors to explore further into that. The third paper, moving on to this, again, followed the gravity model. But I would like to sort of, also highlight the fact that, you see, the problem with the gravity model is when you use gravity model and then try to infer about it, the inbuilt problem is we take the global average as kind of your point of comparison. And those global average also includes the countries, that are not that good in doing trade, like, some of the African countries, for example. So that is why in deducing those kind of interpretation against the global average, one has to be careful. I didn't understand, why you use the export GDP ratio in your model. If you would like to show openness, probably you could use some kind of information tariff or trade integration rather than export GDP ratio. And also, the previous paper, the multilateral resistance term, which has become so important these days. I do not think you are using it, or at least I didn't see any reflection in the result that you have shown. So that could be one idea. And the final thing is this, that you have demonstrated, the positive impact of the BIMSTEC. And to be honest, the BIMSTEC is still not an FTA. So one interesting dimension is this. Even without having a trade policy induced mechanism, apparently there is some kind of a connection, and that is influencing trade within the BIMSTEC economies. That's a positive thing. But overall, I do think then the idea is how we can take advantage of the current situation, that even without doing nothing, the impact on trade is quite positive. And the other thing is, you really need to link SMEs with the kind of trade policy making that you are suggesting, because it might not be the case. The firms that are exporting, they're really SMEs, but you are focusing on SMEs and then try to conclude the fact that these are all SMEs. So there's something I would like to know. So overall, I thought the three papers are extremely good and have got a lot of insights. But one general conclusion that I'd like to draw is this: if we would like to make concrete policy advice, then perhaps we need to work a bit more. And to be honest, finding the convincing arguments either for trade liberalization and trade integration is a bit of a task that remain in each of the three papers. With those words, Professor Mohanty, I would like to stop here. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much, Dr. Rajak. Very critical comments on all those papers. I think it would give enough of food for thought. I think they will. I'll give some space to respond to your questions.
Honorable
and also,
Chair, just for your help, we actually almost complete our time,
yes,
but we can allocate another 10 minutes maximum.
Yes.
So if we, so probably we may not give enough time for open discussion, but you can always get back to the presenters for their comments. Thank you, and also intervention. Thank you.
Thank you very much. But I'll just, it will be incomplete if you don't go to the floor. I'll just take two questions from the floor before I pass on to the floor to the presenters. So I have to invite two questions from the floor. Floor is now open. Any question, please? Okay, I think it is too late. So must be tired after attending for such a long time. So now I'll get back to the presenters. and let them respond to the questions raised by Dr. Rajak. Now I would like to invite Dr. Mamich for her comments.
Thank you very much. I have some connectivity issues, so I'll try with the camera, but I'm not sure it will work. Thank you, Razak, for excellent comments. And I tried to briefly put it in the comments in the chat as well. It is the estimation is in terms of the value added of production. So therefore, yes, the numbers are lower than when you would have them in gross trade or gross exports values. And indeed, it is, the interpretation in terms of the changes is dependent on the mindset of the policymakers and how they see, the opening of the country and domestic processing, et cetera. So, but if we are building it for the sub-region, then of course the interpretation will go one way, and it will be favorable in terms of the increases of these linkages, right? And let me then just add one sentence on the value of the FTA. It is really to boost the complex forward and backward linkages, so that you can actually add the value between different countries in terms of their ability to use LDC or not barriers. So if Bangladesh is free tariff-free quota, that doesn't mean that the other economies in the BIMSTEC are. So having an agreement that would allow them to actually exchange the components and parts and build on that would go a long way. But as I said, that is probably naive to think that it will happen so soon. So let's see what other things we can do to enhance development of these countries. Let me stop there, and I can exchange a bilateral comments with you, Razak. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Mamichi. My only observation could be that while you are giving cross-country analysis within the region and discussing about forward linkage and backward linkage in using input-output analysis, I think you should be very cautious about the level of developments in different countries and whether countries are really falling into the backward linkages and forward linkages, taking into account other parameters. So that may be my advice on this paper.
Dr. Mohan, we have a raised hand from Yagama Reddy. So probably Professor Reddy has a question.
Okay. Yes, Dr. Reddy. Dr. Reddy, floor is yours.
Anyway, probably you can go ahead, Dr. Mohan.
Okay. I'll do that. So now I would like to invite Samima, Dr. Samima for her reply. 2 minutes, please.
Hello.
Please unmute yourself.
Another contributor of this paper, Dr. Jaman, is here. He will be happy to answer the questions. Okay.
Okay.
Thanks, Professor Mohanty, for giving me the floor. I am Dr. Kajar Pujaman, is the other contributor of that paper. So I'm happy to answer and to just address some of the issues that Professor Rajak has raised in very short. First of all, he mentioned about the trade and the welfare gain. Yes, of course, that's a long run debate on that, how the trade could actually give the positive welfare gain in social terms and other terms. Here I suggested that our paper can go a bit further to discuss on these issues, especially this export diversification issue, and at the same time the distributional efficiency is another key, how the gain has been distributed among the people. That's might result the welfare gain from the trade. Secondly, yes, of course, because of our time limitation and data, we actually go to straightforward just plotting some causal relationship between the trade openness and the other SDG factors. But yes, of course, we have the plan to just go beyond and to use the Granger causality test or some other econometrics model to just check on those issues. One thing he also suggested that we actually considers that the multilateral gravity model. In fact, we use the bilateral gravity model in our paper. So that's why maybe that amount of gain, it looks a bit higher, as he mentioned correctly. So we'll check whether we can consider on that part. One question came from Professor Yagama Reddy that I have just taken from the chat box. The questioner he mentioned that can you recommend digital technology and logistic and transportation system in reducing the NTM? Well, digital technology, it has a two-dimensional effect. First of all, it can facilitate the trade in terms of just introducing some kind of online platform to help the customs, logistic, and other documentation that will actually help to reduce the cost of the trade. And in the second way, the trade creation also can be induced using that digitalization process, because all the countries in this BIMSTEC, so far I have checked the data, they are having the dependency ratio that's very low in these countries. That means they're about to attain the demographic dividend. So demographic dividend is directly related with digitization process. So the countries can also gain from that angle, and they can create more trade using this digitization system. And transportation is, of course, very key issues in this region, and we must address the communication in terms of air, sea, and water. And in our model, we actually have to plan to go further and to extend it in export inefficiency effect model. So that could also address how this inefficiency terms can be influenced by all those factors, like I already mentioned that digitization, transportation, institutional development, this kind of things. So I need to thank all of you, and I would like to stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Kazi. I think it's a good paper, but I would definitely ask you to see the linkage between the trade and SDGs, the way it is plotted over time, and try to link it. That may not be the appropriate way of examining the impact of trade on different SDGs. I think more work needs to be done in that particular area to make it more robust. Thank you. So now I would like to invite Mr. Nishant. Floor is yours.
Thank you, Professor Mohanty. Thank you, Professor, for the very insightful comments in this. We'll try to incorporate that. So one thing that you raised was why we add this broader policy recommendation, as we've just been doing working paper, and we tried to pick up the top exporters which are being exported from the region to outside. So we thought majority of them were SMEs. So we just thought, okay, I think even the processing industries were SMEs. So we just presumed that, okay, it might be SME. So we'll just take that as a consideration as well. Another concern that you raised was on the export and GDP linkage. So we just wanted to see the marginal propensity to import. So we wanted to see MPM in relation to the PPML model. So that's why we tried to use the export there as well. And another question I think I raised from Professor Yagaman Reddy. So it was regarding the distance and export promotion. So it's generally the gravity model suggests that exports have a negative relation, but we just wanted to see that, also raise that concern that even the gravity model suggests that, but we don't think it's just because of the distance that BIMSTEC is not trading itself. So it's because of the other so many reasons that we have, and also, as we know, we don't have a very comprehensive BIMSTEC trade agreement as well. So we will try to incorporate this, and as a feedback on a final paper, I'll share it with you, sir. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. I think the definition of identification of MSME is the most crucial element in a trade area, because if you take trade or industry at 4-digit ISIC, you also find that coexistence of corporate sector, SMEs, and cottage sector in each and every country. It would be very difficult to delineate between these three sectors in a very segmented industry. So in many countries, including India, the statistics we get about MSME, their contribution to trade, their contribution to total output of the country, and also employment, many times they're not up to the mark. The quality of information is very poor. So my suggestion could be that when we're referring to MSME, which is the most critical area in any country, whether it is small country or large country, doesn't matter. But as MSME is very important for even developed countries. They are the backbone of the economies, and proper definition, without the absence of proper definition of MSME, proper identification of industries and sectors, and correspondence with SIs, SITC or HS, it would be very difficult to link between trade and the production sector. So that is very important. I think as a PhD student, you will be more inclined to focus on this critical area. That would be quite useful. Thank you. I think I must thank everybody. It would be very difficult to summarize. So many issues are discussed, though there are only 3 papers, but so many issues, so many dimensions, and also rigor applied in the different papers are really amazing. And when the volume would come out, possibly it would be very nice to see that there are good papers really focusing on different dimensions of our region. So I must thank Dr. Salim Rahan, Professor Prabir De, and all of you, the panelists, so nice, so cooperative in terms of making presentation and also sticking to timelines, so that at least I took additional 10 minutes to compile it. So thank you very much. With this, I stop. I think this session is over.
Thank you, Dr. Mohanty. Thank you so much. I think it was a wonderful session. And I must thank the 3 presenters and also Dr. Abdul Razak as a discussant. So it was, I think, a very useful session to start with the paper presentation session. And we have another paper presentation session. We'll start in next 2 minutes. And thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you very much.